Rowan, we need to talk. The firm tone in Jamie's voice made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned to face my ex with a guarded expression, my mind instantly going to our son Casey. Jamie's eyes were cold as stone. I want full custody of Casey. The words hung heavy in the air, a merciless blow that stole my breath away. I stared at Jamie in disbelief, desperately searching his face for any trace of a joke or misunderstanding. But his jaw was set, his demeanor brooking no argument. What? No? You can't be serious. I managed, my throat tightening. Custody had never been an issue between us before. Why now, after all these years of me being a devoted parent? Jamie's lip curled with contempt. I can give Casey a better life than you ever could on your measly salaries from those dead-end jobs. White-hot anger blazed within me, singeing away my shock. How dare he belittle the sacrifices I'd made to support Casey? I worked tirelessly, taking on multiple jobs to ensure he never went without, to give him the stable life Jamie and I had promised. You smug son of a bitch, I spat, fists clenching. Casey is my whole world. You're delusional if you think I'll let you take him from me so easily. Jamie met my fury with an infuriatingly dismissive scoff. We'll see what the judge has to say. With my resources, this won't even be a fight. He gave a thin smile that made my skin crawl before turning on his heel and storming off. Left seething in his wake, my mind raced. What had prompted this sudden custody bid? Could it be related to the inheritance from my great-aunt that had recently come through? Cold tendrils of dread snaked through me at the thought of Jamie's potential motivations. I was shaking with a potent mix of rage and terror at the prospect of losing Casey. The legal system could be precarious. What if the courts deemed Jamie's wealthy lifestyle as more suitable for providing for our son? I couldn't allow that to happen. Not when I had fought through every obstacle to give Casey the life he deserved. No, I wouldn't back down without a vicious battle. If Jamie thought I would roll over because he out-earned me, he was severely mistaken. I would fight for Casey with every fiber of my being, make him rue the day he came after my family. There was no choice. I had to find a way to stop Jamie before his ploy turned my world upside down. My chest ached with the thought of Casey being torn from me. I wouldn't let Jamie rip our lives apart for his selfish whims, not while I still drew breath. My jaw hardened with grim resolve. No matter what lies or actions Jamie resorted to, I would match them tooth and nail. When it came to protecting Casey, I would do whatever it took to emerge victorious. This was an unforgivable line Jamie had crossed, and there would be a reckoning. I called Taylor, the razor-sharp family law attorney, before Jamie even made it home that night. Her gravelly voice crackled over the line as I explained the situation through gritted teeth. That bastard is coming after Casey because of the inheritance money, I snarled. He couldn't care less about being a parent. There was a weighty pause before Taylor responded. I had a feeling this was about the trust fund. Don't worry, Rowan. If Jamie wants a fight, I'll bury him under so much legal debris, he'll wish he never hatched this ridiculous scheme. A spark of hope flickered in my chest, tempering my fury for a moment. You think we can stop him? Absolutely. We just need to dismantle his case piece by piece. I have a few ideas already, Taylor said with conviction. First, we request all his financial records to establish motive. Over the next few weeks, the bitter battle intensified rapidly. I discovered the true extent of Jamie's deceit. He had leveraged the failing family restaurant to the brink of bankruptcy, leaving him in a desperate situation. The inherited money was a lifeline for him to maintain his ego and reckless spending habits. Not a chance you're using my child to dig yourself out of the hole you created. I spat at Jamie across the negotiation table, Taylor's steadying hand on my shoulder. Jamie's eyes glittered with malice. Is that what you think, Rowan? Maybe Casey would be better off with someone who can actually provide, instead of that hovel you keep him in. My blood boiled, but Taylor cut in smoothly. My client has established a stable, loving home for Casey, which is more than can be said for you, Mr. Reynolds, or should I say Mr. Chapter 11. She slid a file of his debt records across the table. Jamie's face went red, sputtering in wordless outrage. It was deeply satisfying to see his arrogant mask shatter in the face of Taylor's relentless disassembling of his falsehoods. Despite the streams of vile accusations and personal attacks Jamie hurled my way, I refused to budge an inch. Each round it fired only strengthened my resolve. Nothing would make me abandon Casey. Not while I was still breathing. Unfortunately for Jamie, his underhanded tactics soon came to light thanks to Taylor's ruthless investigative skills. The court wasn't impressed by his transparent grabs for money and fabricated narratives about my incompetence as a parent. Jamie grew increasingly flustered and desperate as the case progressed. One day before a hearing, Taylor warned me with a grim look. "Jamie has hired a private investigator to dig into your personal life. Be prepared for anything, Rowan." I clenched my jaw, having expected such wretched behavior. "He can try whatever he wants. I have nothing to hide. My focus is Casey, always has been." Taylor nodded firmly, "And we'll make sure the court understands that crystal clear." As the custody hearing loomed, I braced for the worst, but my conscience remained clear. Whatever mud Jamie tried to fling, it wouldn't stick. Not when I had sacrificed so much for the well-being of my son. If losing was inevitable for Jamie, I would make sure he paid a heavy price for his despicable, selfish actions. Casey's life was not a bargaining chip to be played. I would fight until my dying breath to protect the loved I cherished most. As the court proceedings dragged on, Jamie's desperation escalated to unsettling new heights. He began lashing out at me publicly, no doubt hoping to sway opinion by painting me as an unfit parent. "Oh look, there goes Rowan, the devoted single parent who chooses dead-end jobs over spending time with their own child," he sneered loudly at a community event, ensuring his venom carried across the park. I felt dozens of eyes burning into me, but refused to show weakness by reacting. Taylor had drilled it into me to never engage, no matter how vile Jamie's taunts became. Thankfully, our community wasn't easily fooled. A group of parents from Casey's school, including my closest friend Angela, swiftly came to my defense. "That's rich coming from someone who hasn't bothered showing up for any of Casey's events in years," Angela shot back fiercely. "We've all seen how Rowan bends over backwards as a single parent." Jamie flushed an ugly crimson, finally skulking away after failing to goad a response from me. I caught Casey's eye from across the park, and my heart clenched at the pain etched on his face from witnessing that ugly display. The nights grew longer as legal fees mounted from fighting Jamie's scorched earth campaign. My work shifts had to increase to keep the bills at bay, leaving me with little downtime. I longed for a break, but persevered knowing it was all for Casey's well-being. At my wits' end one evening after a double shift, there was an unexpected knock at my door. I was overwhelmed to find Angela and a few other parents with armfuls of home-cooked meals. "We know things have been brutal lately, so we've formed a meal train to lighten your load where we can," Angela said simply, wrapping me in a tight hug. I could only nod wordlessly, unable to find the words to express the depths of my gratitude at their kindness and support. After living on granola bars, the smell of hot food made my eyes water. It was a poignant reminder that while Jamie attempted to tear my world down, I wasn't alone. That night, I tucked a sleeping Casey in, undisturbed for once without me having to be at work. My eyes traced the contours of his cherubic face, my heart swelling with profound love and the determination to never let Jamie remove this precious presence from my life. The tide began to turn, as Taylor uncovered more financial improprieties in Jamie's records. He had massively understated his debts and overhead, no doubt hoping it would look more viable for him to pursue custody. At our next court appearance, Taylor systematically dismantled the stability Jamie professed to offer Casey if he were granted custody. "Your client's business has been delinquent on rent for over 6 months and has an unpaid tax lien, does it not?" Taylor grilled Jamie's lawyer, barely suppressing her disdain. Jamie squirmed in his seat, shooting me a withering glare that I deflected with stony indifference. For too long he had believed his money and status could insulate him. No more. Mr. Reynolds is grasping at straws, trying to leverage his child for money due to his own sloppy business mismanagement. Taylor warned the judge. Does that sound like a parent prioritizing their child's well-being? When the judge's flinty eyes bored into Jamie, I saw the first flickers of doubt and fear cross the man's smug veneer. For once, the gathering dark clouds appeared to be swirling around Jamie instead of me as the case reached its pivotal stages. But I took no pleasure in it. My sole focus was safeguarding Casey's future. Whatever the personal or financial cost, there could be no surrender. Not when protecting my son's welfare was the purest cause I would ever fight for until my dying breath. The escalating custody battle was weighing heavily on Casey. I could see it in the slump of his small shoulders, the dimming light in his eyes. My heart ached for the toll this was taking, for the childhood innocence being chipped away by the unrelenting adult hostilities. No matter how much I tried to shield him, to maintain a sense of normalcy, Casey wasn't immune to the tensions slowly strangling our household. Jamie's barrage of attacks and malicious rumor-mongering could only be deflected for so long. One evening, when I dragged myself home from the hospital well past midnight, a bone-deep dread seized me at the darkened windows and deathly silence enveloping the house. "Casey?" I called out, my voice breaking the unearthly stillness as I dumped my bag. No response. Panic rapidly constricted my chest as I tore through the rooms. The bed was empty, covers flung haphazardly aside. Casey's treasured stuffed elephant lay discarded on the floor, staring up at me almost accusingly. I frantically punched in Taylor's number with trembling hands. "He's gone," I stammered when she picked up, barely holding it together. "Casey's gone." To her credit, Taylor remained calm as I spiraled, grounding me long enough to organize a search party to comb the neighborhood and alert the authorities. Within the hour, concerned neighbors and friends fanned out, calling Casey's name into the inky blackness between street lamps while cop cruisers prowled the vicinity. Part of me viciously hoped this was Jamie's doing, that he had taken things to this level to regain leverage over me. Because if not, the alternative, that Casey had reached his breaking point from the chaos and run off alone, was too unbearable to accept. Dawn was breaking before a blessedly familiar voice pierced the fearful hush that had descended. "Over here! I found him!" Angela yelled, cradling a trembling, tear-stained Casey. I ran like a woman possessed, skidding to my knees and enveloping my son in a crushing embrace, fear and relief crashing over me in waves. Thank God he was all right. For a few harrowing hours of frantic darkness, I thought I had lost the anchor of my entire world. Casey mumbled apologies into my shoulder between hitching sobs. I pulled back, gripping his small face in my hands to look him square in the eyes. "Don't you ever scare me like that again, you hear me? I can't lose you, Case." My own tears were flowing freely now, the terror of imagining life without him nearly paralyzing. "I just want this to be over," he cried, voice tiny and impossibly weary for one so young. "Dad's being so mean, and I don't understand why." White-hot fury lanced through me at Jamie, at the emotional wreckage he was leaving with his selfish, underhanded attacks. I crushed Casey to my chest, whispering fierce reassurances that it would be okay, that I would never abandon him to that vile man's clutches. All eyes turned as Taylor strode purposefully towards us, her face carved from granite. She looked down at Casey's crumpled form, then slowly raised her gaze to meet Jamie's, where he hovered on the periphery. A charged silence stretched between them, thick as a bowstring about to snap. Taylor's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "Your campaign of terror ends today, Mr. Reynolds. That was the last sickening stunt I will allow." If looks could kill, Jamie would have combusted from the sheer loathing blazing in Taylor's eyes. My own rage roiled at a fever pitch, the instinct to lash out nearly overpowering, until I felt Casey tremble against me, a heart-rending reminder of who needed protecting most. In that moment, I knew any rule hadn't been just bent. It had been obliterated. Taylor was done playing professional niceties with this disgraceful excuse for a human being. All barrels were being unleashed. And though it both terrified and gratified me, I silently vowed to let the mask drop too, and match any brutality if that's what it took to shield my son. For Casey, I would wage mutually assured destruction against Jamie if needed. There would be no more half measures. Either Jamie backed down immediately, or I would mercilessly, remorselessly, grind every last one of his depraved ambitions into dust. In the aftermath of Casey's terrifying disappearance, an uneasy truce settled over the custody battle. Outwardly, at least, because behind the scenes, Taylor had gone nuclear in her determination to finally bury Jamie once and for all. "We're going scorched earth from here on out," she informed me one evening, a feral glint in her eyes. I've got a new line of attack all lined up to decimate what's left of his case. A hard knot formed in my gut. After the stunt Jamie had pulled with Casey, part of me wanted to hear Taylor's plan, to have her lay out exactly how the killing blow would be delivered to that depraved, egomaniacal monster. But another part, the part that still remembered the guy I had once loved and built a family with, that part felt sick over the prospect of utterly destroying him, no matter how vile his actions had become. What would be left of my own humanity if I went along with Taylor's ambush? Could I go through with it and still look Casey in the eyes? These turbulent thoughts must have shown on my face, because Taylor's expression softened slightly. Listen, Rowan, I know this is an impossible situation, but he brought this maelstrom upon himself by using Casey as a pawn. You only wanted to protect your child. I rubbed my temples wearily. I know. It's just, I can't help but wonder if there's any shred of decency buried in there, you know? Like, should we be taking the highway instead of going full nuclear? Taylor fixed me with a level stare. You want my honest opinion? Jamie disavowed any right to human decency the moment he tried to use his own flesh and blood for financial gain. Her words hung heavily between us, undisguised disgust twisting her features. Suddenly, Taylor pushed a folder across the table towards me. Which is why I think you need to see this, so there's no room for doubt left. Hesitantly, I thumbed open the file, ice prickling along my spine when I recognized Jamie's looping scrawl detailing an elaborate fraud scheme to siphon money from Casey's trust fund. The pages heavily outlined how he could bypass oversight by attaining sole custody. There were calculations for ensuring maximum payout, notes about manipulating legal loopholes. It was all there in terrifying clarity, leaving no ambiguity to Jamie's depravity. I felt bile rising as the full extent of his betrayal really hit. My head swam with horrifying visions of Casey forever scarred and disillusioned by this monstrous revelation about his dad. A piece of me still loved the man I had once built a life with, had a child with, but that man was gone, devoured by greed and self-interest. There was no redemption to be found, only a vile, grasping husk masquerading as a father. Unshakable resolution overcame me then. No more attempts to understand, to appeal to morality or consciences Jamie clearly did not possess. Taylor was right. He had long forfeited any pretense of humanity with his contemptible actions. Fixing Taylor with a steely look, I slid the file back across the table with a decisive thud. Do what you have to. Use this to dismember every shred of his false credibility in court. I was a fool for doubting the depths of his villainy. She gave a grim nod, squaring her shoulders as if girding for war. I knew when I saw this, you'd want to bring out the heavy artillery. We can avoid dragging Casey through the mud. Let me construct an airtight case and present it all in one concentrated legal salvo. He won't know what hit him. Good. Do it. My tone was resolute, unflinching. Any last traces of sympathy I'd harbored for Jamie had been scourged. The hardened dad inside emerged, fiercely determined to remove this toxic malignancy from our lives forever. After glimpsing the black abyss of his treachery, I knew there was no going halfway against Jamie. For Casey's sake, he had to be rendered a complete, inarguable threat, once and for all. There would be no more hesitation, no flickers of doubt preventing me from safeguarding my family from this virulent scourge of a man at all costs, no matter how sickening the methods required. Mutually assured destruction it would be then. I would match his repugnance tit for tat until the end if that's what it took. There was no line Jamie wouldn't cross, so I would have to be prepared to undercut him at every turn to protect Casey. As the final custody hearing loomed, I found myself yearning for the day when I could finally exhale, freeing us from this nightmare by any means necessary. No price was too high, no tactic too severe to guarantee Casey's well-being would never again be jeopardized by that mercenary, diabolical shell of a man. The tension was thick enough to choke on as we filed into the courthouse for the long-awaited custody hearing. Jamie shot me a withering glare, no doubt still stewing over the damning evidence Taylor had presented. I met his gaze levelly, refusing to show an ounce of fear or hesitation. Not after everything that had transpired. Not after being forced to realize there was no shred of the man I once loved left inside him anymore. Casey clutched my hand tightly as we took our seats, looking up at me with those soulful eyes that still haunted my dreams after his disappearance. I gave his fingers a reassuring squeeze, flashing what I hoped was a confident smile. This had to end today, one way or another. Taylor didn't waste any time once the proceedings commenced. With a curt nod to the court reporter, she strode to the front and began methodically dismantling every pillar of Jamie's case without preamble. Your Honor, we have incontrovertible proof that Mr. Reynolds' sole motivation in pursuing custody is financial gain, which he intended to acquire through fraudulent misappropriation of his child's inheritance. Thick files documenting the fraud scheme were entered into evidence as Taylor laid out the calculated transunion in painstaking detail. With each fresh revelation, color drained from Jamie's face, rendering him more haggard and corpse-like. I felt Casey tense beside me as the sordid realities of his father's ploys were dissected in open court. The shock and pain radiating off of him in waves was a lead anchors around my heart. But I pushed forward, keeping my own expression inscrutable. He needed to see me standing resolute. Whichever way you try to twist it, Mr. Reynolds' own documented intentions show him viewing his child not as a human being to nurture, but as a mere means to an illicit financial windfall, Taylor spat with undisguised contempt. Jamie's lawyer jumped up to object, desperation soaking his sweat-stained collar, but the judge waved him down, fixing Jamie with a look of unadulterated disgust. I've seen all I need to see here today. The evidence of your client's corrupt intentions and utter disregard for his child's well-being is overwhelming. We'd already won, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. But Taylor was relentless, twisting the dagger with an avalanche of corroborating evidence, financial records, testimony from the community about my dedication as a parent, and finally, Casey's own words. Clutching the arms of his chair with trembling hands, he looked at Jamie with an expression that pierced me to my soul. It was one of bottomless sorrow, but also revulsion at the depths of betrayal, of being used as a pawn instead of loved as a child. I want to stay with my mom, Casey stated in a wavering voice. She just wants to protect me. My dad, I don't even know him anymore. Those delicate words lanced through the pall of tension, silencing Jamie's lawyer and all his futile objections. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to sweep Casey up and spirit him away from the debris field that had once been his family. The judge's weary sigh echoed through the courtroom as he delivered his final ruling, awarding sole custody to me in no uncertain terms. I couldn't even savor the relief and victory. My focus could only zero in on Casey, hunched beside me like a broken marionette. Jamie wouldn't go quietly, of course. His voice shredded with anguished rage as the final order was declared. You self-righteous bitch! You've destroyed this family, I hope you... The vicious tirade was cut off by a thundering bang of the judge's gavel. That's enough from you, Mr. Reynolds. The court has issued its final decision, and you will abide by it. Your actions have been utterly reprehensible, and you'll be lucky if more serious charges aren't brought after this disgraceful scheme. And just like that, it was over in an anticlimactic rush. Jamie slumped back in his seat, mouth still moving in silent curses. I couldn't even work up the effort to feel smug or victorious, only a bone-deep wariness. Beside me, Casey was trembling, shoulders shaking with silent tears. Without a word, I pulled him tight against me and just held him while he wept, uncaring of who saw the tattered remains of my family strewn about the courtroom. In that moment, I felt only profound relief that we had survived Jamie's poisonous reign, his cancerous influence now finally excised from our lives forever. Finally, I could begin trying to mend the priceless bond he'd taken a sledgehammer to. As for what lay next, I didn't have the faintest clue. All I knew was that we were free. In the days following the custody ruling, an uneasy quiet settled over our household. Jamie was finally out of our lives for good, but there were still tremors from the seismic disruption his malice had caused. Casey withdrew into himself, haunted by the harsh truth that had come to light about his father. The disillusionment was so palpable, it hung over him like a weighted blanket. I ached to see that bright, vibrant spark extinguished from his eyes. We treaded lightly in those initial weeks, both still processing the emotional trauma only now given space to breathe. There was relief, yes, but also a profound emptiness where the turmoil had previously existed. Jamie, predictably, didn't go quietly into that good night. Threats of appeals and even more vicious personal attacks came raining down from his side. But they rang hollow after the final court smackdown, desperate gasps of a dying man. Instead, it was Taylor who broke the fragile peace with some surprising news. The DA's office is strongly considering criminal fraud charges against your ex for the custody scheme, she informed me one afternoon over coffee. I nearly dropped my mug, staring at her in shock. Part of me had been so focused on winning the custody battle that I failed to consider any further legal ramifications for Jamie. Seeing my alarm, Taylor held up a placating hand. I know, it's a cannonball out of nowhere, but the evidence we presented opened up a whole Pandora's box of financial crimes and very likely jail time for your ex. My head spun. The idea of Jamie potentially being imprisoned was almost too staggering to contemplate, not after being immersed in his toxicity for so long. I don't know what to say, I stammered out finally. Does Casey need to be involved at all? He's already been put through so much because of that bastard. A grim look crossed Taylor's face. Unfortunately, yes, they'll likely want his testimony if charges are filed. The DA will try to minimize things, but Jamie's schemes directly involved Casey as a victim too. White-hot rage flashed through me at the thought of subjecting my son to any more torment related to Jamie's sociopathic actions. He'd already been through enough destructive turmoil, forced to face shattering revelations about his own parent. At the same time, a tiny, vindictive part of me murmured that it was only right for Jamie to face the highest accountability possible for his sickening crimes against his own family. Days later, the call came that charges were indeed moving forward against Jamie for fraud, embezzlement, and a slew of other financial improprieties related to the custody case. The DA's office wanted to meet with Casey to gently explain the situation and how his involvement would proceed. I considered denying them, taking the Salem head-in-the-sand approach to shield my son, but Casey, bless his brave heart, made the choice for me. I want to do it, he stated with a quiet fortitude that both inspired and broke my heart. Dad has to finally face everything he did the right way. So we went, stomaching the legalese explanations and the process staging for Casey to recount some of the turmoil and fear Jamie's skullduggery had woven into our lives. And through it all, Casey held firm, unflinching in his resolve to hold his father to account. That strength, that resilience in the face of such profound injustice and betrayal, it was almost transcendent to witness. This child, my child, who had been so fragile and wounded, was somehow now the pillar upholding us both. When it finally came for the prosecution to request an in-person meeting with Jamie, I feared Casey may falter, shrinking from the impending confrontation with the man who had tormented our family. Instead, he stunned us all by looking the prosecutor dead in the eye and saying, "I want to be there when you talk to him. He needs to see the consequences for how he treated us." On the day itself, I was a wreck waiting outside the cold, sterile conference room. But Casey remained stoic, tome and focused as the prosecutor and I watched through the two-way mirror. Jamie was momentarily jolted from his usual bravado when faced with Casey's unflinching presence. Maybe it was a fleeting glimpse of recognition for the damage his selfish actions had wrought. "Case, son, please. You have to understand. I did what I had to for this family," he pled, the words sounding hollow even to my ears. But Casey was unswayed, leveling his father with a maturity and composure that surely withered whatever shred of soul Jamie had left. "No, Dad," he said evenly, "this was only about you and your greed, not the family." That simple truth, delivered without malice or anger, seemed to deflate Jamie like a popped balloon. Instead of belligerent rage or indignant sputtering, he simply lowered his head in something akin to shame. As the investigators began walking Jamie out in cuffs, he turned to Casey one final time, agony scoring his features. "How?" he started brokenly. "How can you ever forgive me?" For several beats, the weight of that leaden question hovered between father and son, a valley too wide to cross. Finally, Casey spoke in a voice infinitely sad but resolved. "I don't know if I can yet, but maybe one day if you finally face what you've done." And with that, the broken shadow of Jamie Reynolds was led away, Casey watching impassively. He disappeared from view. With Jamie's poisonous presence finally excised, a startling calm descended over our lives. Like the fragile quiet after a Category 5 hurricane has finally blown itself out to sea. Casey and I tread carefully those first few weeks, still adjusting to the lack of chaos, of not having to brace for Jamie's next despicable maneuver. Our guards were perpetually up, nerves taut as high wires anticipating the other shoe to drop. But gradually that wariness melted away into something resembling peace. An alien concept, after being embroiled in such psychological warfare for so long. Of course, some scars don't simply disappear overnight. I caught Casey staring off wistfully at times, no doubt wrestling with the shattering disillusionment about his father's true nature. My heart broke watching those village clouds pass over his eyes. But he was resilient, certainly more so than his battered mother. With Jamie neutralized, it was Casey who helped me to shake off the suffocating miasma of fear and embark on the road to healing. With my hostage salary no longer being pillaged by legal fees, I was finally able to pursue a little dream, opening up my own small bakery in our quaint downtown neighborhood. The community rallied around in full force, with a crowdfunding campaign ensuring I could get the space up and running. I'll never forget the look of pride glowing from Casey when he cut the ceremonial opening ribbon. A moment of pure, uncomplicated joy, the first of many to counterbalance the anguish we had endured. Over the first few months, the bakery became a sanctuary not just for my entrepreneurial spirit, but for Casey too. He befriended the elderly couple who owned the bookstore next door, spending hours with them listening to colorful tales and learning comforting new recipes. I remember poking my head in one lazy Saturday afternoon to find Casey sitting on Mrs. Langley's floral sofa, chirping away as she patiently showed him how to knit. The simple peace of that moment will forever be seared into my soul. Mr. Langley, bless his wit, caught my eye as I watched Casey's lesson. He gave me an exaggerated wink before mock whispering, "Should have known that boy would take to the domestic arts like a duck to water with you as his mama." My cheeks flushed at the tender scene, so overwhelmed that I could only muster a watery smile and murmur, "Better him than me, that's for sure." As the bakery grew into a beloved local hotspot, our new normal took root and blossomed. Without the specter of Jamie's toxicity poisoning our days, I was able to cherish each milestone and disorder from Casey. His first student council election, where he gave an impassioned speech about protecting the little guys. The drama club production of Our Town, where he stole every heart in the audience with his earnest portrayal of the stage manager. Even just the quieter, cherished moments, like him presenting me with a hand-knit scarf one chilly December evening, slightly misshapen and lopsided as all guided love, but perfect in its imperfections. With each new memory minted, another metaphorical tile was laid, forming the rock-solid foundation our future world be built upon. One strengthened by our shared triumphs over adversity, by the powerful lodestar of our familial love fortified through the crucible. When the cooking classes and baking demonstrations I hosted at the shop started generating some local media buzz, part of me felt a flicker of petty satisfaction. Not just at proving the self-sustaining life I'd built despite Jamie's vile machinations, but at glimpsing how deliciously it must have stung his ego. Still, I never reveled in that gratification for long, merely acknowledged it brusquely before turning my focus to what mattered most, savoring our hard-earned serenity while planting the seeds for future joys. Because in the end, watching Casey gradually blossom into a resilient, kind-hearted young man was the finest validation I would ever need. With each assured step he took, it repudiated Jamie's sneering assertion that I was unfit to parent. We had risen, tempered by fire instead of broken by it. Our bond, our family unit of two, inevitably became stronger through the grueling test of perseverance, and the sacrifices, the suffering, it all dissolved into an insignificant abyss, eclipsed by the radiant light of our legacy persevering. As midnight inevitably fell on Casey's high school graduation night, we stood in the warmly lit kitchen amid confetti and celebratory chaos. He wrapped me in a tight, lingering hug, whispering, "Thank you for never giving up on me, on us. I know the road wasn't easy, but we made it through, together." Tears of profound pride and love blurred my vision, reducing the chiseled young man before me into the bright-eyed little boy I had fought tooth and nail to protect from harm. Voice choked with emotion, I whispered back the words that encompassed my entire universe. That's all that will ever matter, Casey. You and me, withstanding any onslaught as long as we have each other. Nothing and no one will ever make me forsake that, I promise.